Kola hole. This was the place my father warned me in his final moments to never travel to. Ever since I was a little girl, I always had to look out for my father. He was one of the workers who helped in drilling the Kola hole in western Siberia, one of the biggest projects ever conducted by man. During the later years of the Kola hole project, my father joined on as one of the technicians helping to drill down into the Earth's crust, further exposing the rock and water that lay kilometers below the surface of the Earth. More than 12 kilometers down, a hole made by Russian scientists was made to try to make it to the center of the Earth. The project itself was the most daring expedition ever devised by a government to dig down into the Earth. New instruments for drilling into the Earth's crust had to be invented. Entire systems and towns were built to keep the hole from collapsing and to keep the project ongoing. Over the course of nearly 2 decades, Russian scientists had dug down below the largest known locations in the world and had made it well below the Earth's surface. However, as they began to drill, many strange things began to occur. The rock they were drilling into became much hotter than they had previously predicted, causing the rocks below to act in a strange fashion as they drilled. The Earth itself reacted to the drills as if it were made of plastic. The rock had become something almost organic and would not move, as hard as the scientists tried to extract the rock. The heat below the surface exceeded temperatures of 180 degrees Celsius, and the heat became too hot to continue drilling. But something else that no one has been able to explain to me happened. As my father was one of the drill technicians responsible for monitoring the process of the drill, he was first on hand when an accident occurred. Heat below had caused the drill to malfunction, and he was harmed in the removal process. He walked away, injured from the operation, and retired on grounds of an inability to continue his work. However, I always noticed a strange mark that traced itself up my father's left arm. He told me not to touch it, as it would hurt him. The skin there was scarred by a large burn, but he never explained how he got it. He had been asked before about the incident, but he never gave the same story. The story would change often and was never consistent. He first claimed that the equipment, when it was extracted, had burned him, later claiming that he was burned by petroleum at the site of extraction, and even later said that one of the homes the workers were staying in caught fire, and he was burned as a result. None of this made sense, but I never questioned my father or his injuries from his work on the Kola hole project. However, with the recent passing of my father, the Kola hole has resurfaced as a topic of concern in my life. My father was doomed after his incident to live a short life due to low blood circulation and a weakened heart. I stayed by my father's side throughout his final moments. What disturbed me was not how he feared death, or feared to be away from his family. What disturbed me was how he feared the thing that gave him his scars and ultimately ended his life. "Valeria, please, do not go to the Kola hole. Whatever you do, never go to the Kola hole." I was puzzled for a brief second, but forgot about it that night. We had a funeral for him a few days after his passing. Quite a few people came, but not much was said about him. My father became quite a recluse, according to a few of his past co-workers, always obsessing over the old Kola project. With the new revelation about some of my father's secret works, I went back home and began to look around his old office room. I looked for some hidden files or possible books I hadn't read before, but nothing came up. That was until I flipped a switch on the side of one of our bookshelves. The shelf rotated out and revealed a hidden room that was masked away from the rest of the house. There was a short staircase that led to it. As I walked in, there was a clear leather comfort chair in the corner of the room, and on the opposite side was a large television with what looked like an old VHS tape player. I looked over at the shelf of tapes and found one called The Incident. I took it off of the shelf and placed it into the tape player. The film started off and showed some clips of my father working at the main machine, on helping to lift up the drill. But something was glowing from inside the entrance of the hole. Smoke was billowing up from the hole in the background, and a deep red glow was emanating from several kilometers below. There were shouts and screams coming from just beyond view, as scientists ran off in all directions away from the hole. I saw my father try to pull up the drill as quickly as possible, hoping to bring it out in time. But as he pulled it out, something horrifying happened. Out from the bottom of the hole, a hand engulfed in flames reached for and grabbed my father's left arm, burning his arm in the process of trying to drag him down into it. But he held on to the machine, gripping for dear life. As he extracted the burning hot drill, one of the pieces fell down the hole, hitting whoever was reaching for him and releasing their grip on him long enough for him to escape. From below, the hole bellowed out in a deep and frightening tone at my father. "You will be our Joseph. We have marked you, and you will find a path to hell soon enough." As the smoke continued to rise, other workers rushed in with a large cap and placed it over the hole, drilling in several bolts to hold it in place. I could see, on the far left of the frame, my father, panting on the floor, having just escaped an early grave by a supernatural force within the earth. His arm had now cooled down, and the mark I had always seen on his arm had now formed. I paused the tape and became even more curious as to what the thing below the surface had said to my father. "You will find a swift path to hell soon enough." I wondered what could have caused my father to have been marked, and began to search through the tapes again for any further insight into this terrifying incident. I eventually came across a tape titled "My Biggest Mistake." I took out the tape from the old Kola hole facility and placed in the second tape. The tape started slow, but something was already off. My father had the camera aimed at someone who wasn't my mother, and the marking on his left arm was clearly visible as he held the camera with his right. The woman slowly began to undress, talking in a seductive tone to my father. As I watched a bit more of the tape, before inevitably stopping it to avoid the cruel fact that faced me on the television screen, my father was having an affair behind my mother's back, and he had videotaped one of the times him and this other woman had sex. The being from beyond the Kola hole had marked my father for dead. I searched around the room for more documents and came across a note that my father had made just 2 days before his passing. I can feel myself beginning to fade. My mistakes have finally cost me my life, and I will now be paying for my mistakes. I only hope that if my wife or daughter find this, that they can forgive me. I am doomed to hell, and I have no one to blame but myself. Being cursed by that being just beyond the gate of hell simply sealed a sooner death date for me. I do not deserve forgiveness or salvation, and will rot for my actions. But if there was some chance I could be saved, I would take that chance. However, I fear that it is too late now to seek salvation. I will suffer forever in a blaze of fire for my actions, and there is no one who can save me. There was something in my father's tone that drove me to my breaking point. I wanted my father back more than anything, and decided to pack several days' worth of food and water, pack several tools that would help me break the iron seal, and invited one of my friends with me to make it to the old Kola drilling site. A day after making preparations, we made our way from my home in Moscow to the edges of the facility, stopping in one of the nearby towns. From there, we went out on foot and made our way through the blistering cold and raging winds to the building that housed the drilling site. It took us a while to finally arrive at the site, but once we were there, we set up camp for the night. However, as we arrived, there were many messages strewn across the walls. Turn back. Cursed. Hell awaits beyond the seal. And other messages like them were all over the old and collapsed building. We had decided to open the seal as soon as night had fully arrived. I laid out the tools in front of the seal and made sure every one of them was working properly. The messages filled me with fear of the possibility of being dragged down to hell. But I had brought these supplies and tools all this way out here, and I wasn't about to give up on my father yet. I knocked on the seal first, with a hammer, hearing the metal seal roar with the loud pound of the hammer. The hammer did nothing to dent the seal, so we looked at other tools that would help to crack this thing open. But as my friend and I reached for our drill, we heard a voice from below. It spoke in a raspy tone, but its message was clear. Turn back now, Valeria, and you will be safe. It was my dad. He was trapped down below the surface in hell, and he could hear me. I froze in fear and excitement. My father could hear me from below, but I could only free him if I broke the seal. So I made sure to adjust the end pieces of the drill to be able to remove the bolts keeping the seal in place. But as soon as I finished this, the thought of my mortal danger brought me to a halt. What if this venture to save my father backfires, and I end up dragged down to hell? I am one to believe in forgiveness, and believe my father deserves salvation. So, I will still attempt to free him. I am making this final note to detail my final moments before breaking the seal. My friend moved a fair distance away, as I told him the possibilities that awaited me. I have accepted my possible fate and will attempt to open the seal. I seal my fate in this message, and if I am forever lost to hell, I leave you with this. Do not be afraid to explore, even if it seems death may be awaiting just beyond the edge.
It has been quite some time since I visited my hunting cabin in Siberia, but after the last series of storms that swept through this remote wilderness, I knew I must return to the cabin to examine the damages. The journey is never easy, but my old age has not helped make this journey any easier. 7 days and 7 nights was what it would take by foot, but thankfully the roads were still clear on the path to the cabin. I made my way up to Siberia and drove through the wilderness to the cabin, making my way through the trees as I would have in years past. Something felt off. The snow had fallen greatly this year, but the path to the cabin remained clear. The trees nearby were almost clear of snow. But most strange of all was the light I found coming from the cabin itself as I approached it. I have never left any lights on at the cabin before, especially months between visits. I must proceed with caution. There is no telling what could have been done in my absence. Dear God, what has been done to my cabin? The moment I opened the front door, I was greeted with a brightly illuminated room, courtesy of the fireplace, and upon the walls were disfigured faces and skins made out of humans. The skins were fresh and had yet to dry out, as is the custom with other animal skins. The faces were what horrified me the most. Blood had dried around the edges of the mouth and had immortalized their horrified expressions. What on earth had motivated someone to come into my cabin and do this? Amongst the defiled bodies and skins were statues made entirely of bone. Someone had used the bones and carved horrific structures, displayed prominently along the walls of the main seating area. The cabin had been turned into a nightmare, one by someone who felt killing was an art form. I steeled my nerves and proceeded with a firearm in my hands, ready to kill the madman who had killed all of these people. Whoever had done this had done it many times. I counted 30 skins all along the walls and roof of the cabin. They had taken their time, and were careful at their craft. I was dealing with a true psychopath, and I could not be more careful in any time of my life if I was to survive. I made my way throughout the house, looking for the madman, keeping my senses perked at every turn. I checked the refrigerator and found meat inside. Meat I did not recognize at first, until I saw the shapes of it. The man who had killed these people had preserved the meat. Despicable. But there were more horrors to explore. I proceeded throughout the cabin, looking for any signs of human life, and proceeded upstairs to the bedroom and looked for any sign of people. I made my way to my bedroom and found discarded plates and blood stains across the floor, and my bed was a mess. There were trails of meat all over the floor, never having made it to the trash. The horrors that laid throughout my cabin were all but complete, until a single thought crossed my mind. I had been through every part of this cabin, except for the freezer. Most people would overlook such a thing, but in a case like this, I couldn't think of any place the killer could be hiding the bodies. I had to make my way down to the freezer and see if the killer still had any bodies in there. To little surprise, there were several bodies that were strung up on meat hooks. But the body that surprised me the most was of my nephew, Sven. He had hung himself inside of the meat locker by a rope and hook, and kicked a chair out from underneath himself. I saw there was a note on the floor next to him. I picked it up and removed the light frost that covered it, and read out what my nephew had left me. I had sent him up 3 weeks prior to check on the cabin, but he had never returned. I now understood why he was absent, but I knew not of why there were dead bodies in my cabin. Determined to discover the true cause of the transformation of my cabin, from a welcoming home to a house of horrors, I read the note. Uncle Victor, I apologize first of all for the mess, but I could not contain my desire to hunt anymore. There was a desire beyond me to hunt after the largest game I could find. But my desires eventually fell on the forbidden animal, humans. I have killed many bears, wolves, and large, strong beasts, but have never killed a person. I questioned whether or not I could do such a thing, but found the desire to hunt too strong. I had become a shadow of my former self and had killed so many people. I knew not where to hide the bodies, so I brought them to the cabin. The longer I kept them in the freezer to preserve them, the more I wanted to do something with them. Instead of going out to hunt, I started to consume the meat of the people to preserve myself, out of respect to them. As you told me before, we must eat what we hunt, lest we become less than what we kill. I dried out the skins and left them around the cabin to dry off for you, and set the bones up into manageable structures. I know it is not the prettiest display, but it was the best I could make. Over these last few weeks, I knew that I had changed too much to return back to normal society. I leave this note for you, knowing that you will be disappointed in me, and I regret my choices. But I know in the end you will forgive your only nephew. I apologize for my actions, and shall pay for them in the afterlife. With love, Sven. My own nephew had left me such a grisly display. He murdered dozens of people, hung their skins in my living room, stacked bones in piles along the walls, left meat in my own bedroom, froze the bodies in the freezer, and hung himself. It was too much to take in all at once. I could not believe how much carnage my only nephew brought upon the people of Russia. The horrors he caused in my absence are what drove him to end his life, and part of me rejoices in that fact. But another part of me is somewhat proud of him. In all of my years, I had never hunted down as many animals in my life, and people are animals of sorts. I could not believe that he had orchestrated this series of murders, but I should expect nothing less of him. He was always a great hunter, but was weak at heart. He took his life after committing the atrocities he wreaked, but still tried to do right by him. Such a shame such a young man like Sven could not manage himself better. He should know that there is always a price to pay when hunting the highest prize. No prize ever hunted down will escape my Siberian Freezer, and I shall preserve the legacy of Sven. Although it will be a short one, as I am not a man to be outdone by a boy. The old saying I used to say to myself still rings true, I suppose. Once someone enters my Siberian Freezer, they will forever stay, frozen in time, and their bodies mine.
As a Russian special ops forensic researcher, few things truly upset me as I complete my work. From removing shrapnel from my comrade's disfigured arm, to disemboweling a dead canine for evidence in a murder. Few cruel and horrific sights trigger any upsetting emotions in me. Some may call me stone cold, but I believe this is what helps me continue my work. I work for the Russian government as a researcher after my father and mother died in a car crash years ago. I may be a young researcher in my early 20s, but life has taught me many hard lessons to prepare me for my work. Nothing in this life is given to you without a price. Others in life will take everything from you if you let them, and your survival can only be guaranteed by your personal will to fight for it. These thoughts all went through my mind on my last mission. I was sent in, along with a team of special operations officers, to Chernobyl to complete a secret mission. A previous team of researchers had been sent out to monitor the surviving residents living in the radioactive wasteland and observe any changes in wildlife. After a week of no response from any members of the team, and a cut transmission from one of the members who was issuing us a warning in code, I was scheduled for a mission to go and find them. However, the mission cut out before we were able to hear what kind of danger and level. The signal from the last radio call we received from them was in an area that remained uncharted. I was ordered by the Russian government to go on the mission covertly and to comply with all orders given by my commanding team. My mission was to enter the wasteland with guard soldiers around me, to collect samples of radioactive soil, trace elements, and any organic or inorganic traces of the soldiers, and to find them dead or alive. I wanted to enter the radioactive site prepared for any situation, so I took 3 days out of my work to prepare for this mission. I assembled the proper radiation suits and my regular uniform. I loaded my handgun and the several magazines I planned to carry as a precaution when I made my way into uncharted territory. I prepared several vials, retrieval tools, and an emergency radio in case my phone gave out during the journey or I was unable to reach them by phone. With all of my preparations made, I prepared for my journey to the Ukraine to begin my setup at one of the local military bases nearby the key radiation site. Once I made it to the base, we drove on through the small town of Slavutich, which was constructed to house the workers who are continuously shutting down the systems in Chernobyl. Our team began to start passing through the town of Pripyat, just outside of Chernobyl. The commander of our team began to speak orders. "All right, comrades. Today we find our fallen men and discover why so many people are being lost to the zone." He began to list out who would have each position during the mission. We had a communications specialist, in case we needed emergency help. We had a scout who would go on ahead and report any suspicious findings. A heavily armed soldier who served as a bodyguard for the entire team, and our commanding officer who would take the lead during the mission. Everyone was ready to proceed forward into Chernobyl and into the zone, the area of Chernobyl where workers have been sent to shut down the systems, but have gone missing as of recently. Our vehicle rode on through the small town of Pripyat, and I watched through the window as I passed the people who had returned for the anniversary of the disaster that shook Russia to its very core. The most devastating nuclear fallout in history was still ongoing to this day, and these people wanted to venture forth into dangerous areas to leave their best wishes for everyone who died during the fallout. Our mission was to proceed forward and find out what happened to the many scientists and researchers whose lives were claimed during the last few months. As kind and gentle as the people were, none of them had a brave enough heart to venture forth into the zone. And that was precisely our mission location. The zone is considered to be inhospitable and uninhabitable by nearly all forms of life, and no humans can withstand prolonged exposure to the radiation. Our mission was simple: find the bodies of those who had died and collect any kinds of samples we could find. Any information related to these deaths were all necessary to bring the Russian government and the Ukrainian government some form of relief. But all that we discovered when we ventured into Chernobyl was nothing short of true and utter terror. The team went before me to scout and map out the area, as well as to ensure my safety. But within merely 10 minutes of being within the outer reaches of the zone, the scout began to sound off. "Commander, we have a problem." The commander ran over to him as he remained knelt down in one spot, running a thick blue sludge through his gloved fingers, physically analyzing the consistency and makeup of the substance. "What is this?" the commander asked him, with a hint of hesitation. All of us wore the proper radiation protection suits, but this substance made everyone a bit nervous. It radiated a blue glow and was very sticky. The scout shook his head in wonderment and lack of assured knowledge of what the substance was. I made my way over to the scout and picked out a clean vial and a cotton swab to collect a sample. "We're not sure what it is, Commander, but our analyst should have an answer when we return home." I sealed the swab inside the vial and placed it back inside the case to avoid spreading radiation. We cautiously ventured forth to the stairs that led into the zone of Chernobyl. We began to climb up the stairs when we heard a large, metal, slamming noise come from below us in an alley. The bodyguard and scout were the first to respond and confront the culprit. Within seconds of witnessing what was making the noise, the scout began to scream for help. The commander gave me a specific order. "Stay here until we have eliminated the threat." He and the communications officer proceeded down into the alley. Gunfire began to fire off. The sounds of bullets ricocheting and flesh being torn apart were clearly audible from my elevated position. The communications officer began sending out an emergency call for help and reinforcements, but within less than 30 seconds later, the fighting had stopped. Something was utterly and horribly wrong. I slowly made my way down the steps and turned to face something so grotesque and awful, words can barely describe it. 3 large humanoid figures, all radiating a tinge of blue and green, began to move towards me, each trying to make some form of noise or gesture. I immediately pulled out my handgun, ready to fight for my life. But it was then that I noticed the bullet holes in their gelatinous bodies. They had gone straight through and were slowly sealing up. These people... No. People is too kind of a word for these monsters. Those gelatinous humanoid figures slowly began to mouth words in Russian I could not understand. "We survived the blast and live here now." Their every word was interrupted by half-breaths and gargling noises. "Chernobyl is our home, and we live on the blood of man." The way these figures spoke sent chills down my spine and made my blood run cold. They didn't sound human, or if they were human once, they no longer considered themselves to be human. Beyond them, I could see the dismembered corpses of my fellow soldiers, their putrid guts and vital organs having been spilled across the alleyway, the ground soaked in a deep shade of crimson. It was then that I noticed one of the other figures, eating the dead bodies with jagged teeth that would give the most vicious hunter a chill down their spine. It gnawed through the bone and tissue, drinking blood and other liquidized fat in the body of the scout's leg, as it poured some kind of acid on it and began to devour the entire leg. These things were not human in any regard. One of the other figures began to speak again. "We survive on the blood of anything and everything. We live alone and survive in the zone, in a toxic bath of death that we readily indulge ourselves in. Do you want to diverge yourself from man and join us? Not only were these horrid figures eating my fellow soldiers and ignoring my desire to run, but they wanted me to join them. Those horrid monsters wanted me to join them. One of them outstretched a toxic hand towards me, as if to extend an arm of goodwill. But I wanted nothing to do with them. I slapped the hand out of my way and began to run with the suitcase in my hand towards the vehicle. I had assumed the monsters to be slow, but their bodies took the shape of a figure that almost floated, as if their feet never touched the ground. They shouted almost indescribable noises at me, which sounded as if they were shouting the word blood over and over again. They moved like water and were catching up to me fast. I sprinted for my very life and did not stop running until I had opened the door and had made it to the driver's seat. There was a key underneath the visor, and I turned it in the ignition. It roared to life as my attention rose to see the three figures swarm towards me like a rushing wave. I switched the gears to drive and quickly sped off away from Chernobyl, the suitcase having flown open and the tube fallen out. I frantically reached for it as I made my getaway from the figures. I finally grabbed the vial and placed it back inside the case, ensured it of its safety. Although I wasn't sure of my safety, even after I left. I quickly made my way back to Russia after stopping back off at the military base and reported back to the Russian government about my findings. I brought the substance back to the lab and began to study it. Other researchers considered it to be the greatest threat since the nuclear bomb against Russia's rivals and enemies. So the Russian government began working on replicating the substance into a weapon. I tried to stop them, time and again, from making this weapon. I warned them of the possibilities of making it into a weapon, but they didn't listen. I analyzed the substance and came back with alarming results. The substance had no cell structure, but responded to different stimuli, just like an independent organism. The majority of it was made of proteins and broken down radioactive materials, but there was a very concerning tendency for the substance to react or act on its own during tests. During one of the tests, it tried to lunge at an assistant through a glass container. Containing the substance remains a challenge, and turning it into a weapon will be an even larger one. Worst of all, I have heard rumors of an American scientist who is hard at work, trying to replicate the results of the Russian government and mass-produce this substance. This blue gel that I found is something that is truly evil and needs to be extinguished before it's too late. He has nicknamed the substance Volvox and plans on continuing his research on how to replicate and destroy it. Unfortunately, I don't think he realizes the danger that he places on the entire world. I dearly hope that this toxic divergence by the Russian government ends soon, or the entire world may feel the toxic grip of Volvox.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams, and bye-bye.